Black Myth Wukong has grown a reputation for being one of the most difficult games to be released to the gaming market in current years. From bosses that feel like they hit like a dump truck, to the constant need of timing your dodges correctly, this game has built up a massive reputation. But not all of it's bad. A lot of people have praised the game. So I was curious, is the game truly difficult? Can I beat it? Well, we're going to find that out. The game Black Myth Wukong is based off an old Chinese novel, Journey to the West, and it's actually a very interesting story. Now, like video games and movies do, the game isn't a word-for-word remake of the book, but it was definitely the main story that inspired this game. This video has been a lot of work to make, so if you end up enjoying it, if you would consider liking and subscribing, it'd be extremely appreciated. I also just wanted to quickly thank everyone who watched me live and helped me get through the game. Now, with that being said, let's get into the game. The game starts off with us being introduced to Wukong, standing on his mountain. The Buddha gods have appeared and want to kill him. Wukong flies over and decides to fight them. Here is where we are introduced to the way this game plays. Some people say it's a Souls-like game, others say it isn't. I personally don't care if it is or isn't. I just want to have fun playing it. The main weapon you use in the game is your staff, but you do have other forms of power to use. This is primarily your abilities. I won't touch on these too much right now, but I will explain them later in the video. With the intro to the game, you can't die. It's entirely about learning how to play, and for someone that has never played a game like this before, it was definitely a learning curve I wasn't ready for. But eventually, I made it through the tutorial fight. At the end of the battle, Wukong gets restrained by his headband and stabbed into a mountain, where he's then left sealed inside the rock, with his sacred treasure being stolen and taken by the Buddha gods. This is where we begin our journey and start the first chapter, Black Cloud, Red Fire. We start the game off in the Forest of Wolves. I spawn in front of two enemies. Here is where I will put my skills that I learned in the tutorial to the test. I instantly dodge and begin my light attack combo. This combo is one that I'll continuously use to great effect throughout the entire game. Something, however, I don't put to use till later on is the target lock feature. This feature does exactly what you think it does. It locks onto an enemy and tracks them without you needing to follow the character. Now that I've beaten those two, I am now introduced to the checkpoint system that is a part of this game. In each chapter there are shrines around the map you can go over and make an offering at. These shrines act as an area where you can craft armor, medicine, and do so much more. Once done offering the incense, I continue to fight my way through the forest, enemy after enemy after enemy. This is a very common occurrence that I noticed throughout the game. It is a lot of running and fighting low tier enemies until you get to a boss. Eventually, after all of the fighting, I noticed this floating green flame. This is known as Will. It is not only the currency of the game, but it is also what fuels your gourd that you heal yourself with, so it is very important that I collect it all, so I can upgrade my armor and buy items in the future. After a little more running, I eventually made it to my next shrine. Here is where I should receive my Trailblazer gift. I had no idea what it was, but it turned out to be a nice set of armor that would help me very soon. I equip all of my armor in my loadout screen. Here is where I could access my inventory, my self-advancement tab, and my equipment tab. I was also able to see my current stats and what level I was. Now that all of my new armor was equipped, I moved forward and ran into my first tough enemy, the Bully Guard. Compared to the enemies to come, this guy was nothing. I went up and instantly started hitting him. Here is where I realized the importance of timing my dodges correctly. Eventually, the Bully Guard threw me onto the ground, but luckily he got frozen. Turns out an old man was the culprit behind the freezing. Here is where we obtain our first ability, Immobilize. This ability, when used, allows you to freeze your enemy in place for a certain amount of time. This is one of the skills I will continue to use throughout the rest of the game. Once I'm finally out of the cutscene, I continue to destroy the Bully Guard until he was finally defeated. Here is where I get my first look into the level up system known as Sparks. These sparks are the building blocks of any great build. Too bad for me, I didn't realize that until far later on in the game. I used my sparks and continue on my way until eventually I got to the next cutscene. I got turned into a bug by the same old man that had saved my life earlier to allow me to scout out the path ahead. In my opinion, this was such a cool feature to add into the game. Sadly, it doesn't happen very often through the game, which is quite a disappointment. I fly ahead and scout out as many of the enemies as I can. I end my transformation in front of a guy that is sitting next to a chest. I defeat him and loot the chest. Some chests contain amazing resources and rare loot, so I open them as much as possible. Eventually, I end up at my first actual boss of the game, the Wandering Wight. This man was a tank. I realized very quickly that I did fuck all damage to him. but he did do a ton to me. But I kept fighting and trying to learn his moves. This continued on for quite some time until the Wandering Wight decided to bend me over and kill me time after time after time. I wasn't ready for that. I assumed I would easily destroy the boss. In fact, earlier I had asked one of my mates if there was a way to increase the difficulty of the game. How naive I was. Eventually I was told that there was another boss in the area that might be easy to start with, and if I was able to beat him, he would give me a new ability that could help me beat this Wandering Wight. I proceeded to head over to the boss known as Daajjeey. Sorry, there's a good chance I'm going to butcher a lot of these names, and destroy him. This is the first actual boss I've been, but he drops his spear, gaining me a new ability called Red Tides. This is a transformation spell that allows me to turn into Daajjeey and attack my target as him, until either run out of stamina or my transformation loses all of its health, and I return into being Wukong. With this new ability, I proceed back over to where the Wandering Wight is. I would be lying if I said that I got this first try after getting the transformation, but after practicing with the transformation and learning the boss's moves, I finally was able to beat down the Wandering Wight and vanquish him. Now after defeating a boss or minor chief, their soul will appear. This allows you to use their ability in battle. I tried to collect the spirit, but it said I need guidance, so I continued on without it. Eventually arriving at what would be my next boss fight, with the boss known as Daajjeey. This white wolf proved to be more intimidating than deadly. I proceeded to attack the wolf, only ever struggling with its attack where it would climb on nearby roofs and launch itself at me. After a while, I beat Daajjeey first try, gaining myself a new armor set. After beating the wolf, I hit another shrine and then ran into the old man. He started to tell me his story, and I realized that this must be the wisdom I was needing to be able to use the spirits. The old man upgraded my gourd, and I then went back to the shrine and gained the lost Wandering Wight spirit. I also learned that I could cultivate the spirits, allowing it to do greater damage, but it was quite expensive, so I only did it once. I then continued to proceed through the bamboo forest, killing some new snake and skeleton enemies and collecting mushrooms that I could use for medicine later on. This tends to be a lot of what you do between boss fights, but because there tends to be side paths, sometimes they lead you to little secret bosses or some great loot. After grabbing the mushrooms, I eventually ran into the person that would be the next boss. I was having a major power trip, the adrenaline was high, and I was on top of the world from being the previous boss first try. But I was quickly put back in my place and reminded that this game isn't to be trifled with. I started off the fight instantly being teleported onto and being wiped down to low HP. I knew this wasn't good, so I tried to heal, but the boss just wasn't letting up. I did do some great damage and almost beat him, but I was ultimately defeated. I realized that none of these boss fights could be played the same. Each one acted differently. I need to be very careful about how I approach these fights. With my newfound sense of clarity, I went straight back into the fight, using my transformation strategically and my immobilize when required, and I managed to come out on top. That's another one down. I continued on and I noticed a bell. I went over and rang it. I didn't know the significance of this bell at the time, but I found out later and was glad I rang it. I continued on my path, eventually killing a snake and saving a fellow monkey. Turns out this monkey allows me to upgrade my gourd and drinks. He definitely will be super helpful later on. I followed the path down into the water and ran to the next boss, the white-clad noble. This would be my first experience with a two-phase fight. I used a few light attacks, my transformation, and a few heavy attacks to get through to phase 2. But I only had half my gourd left and only half my mana. It wasn't looking good and I died. But I wasn't going to give up. I went straight back in and destroyed his first phase, and then I finally killed him in his second phase. He turned to ash and floated away, saying some menacing words before dying. I followed the path behind the boss, eventually getting to what kind of looked like a little temple or house of some kind. I defeated the guards defending the front door and entered. There sat the Black Wind King. He said something about rebuilding the temple and burning the monks in the fire, but to be honest, I wasn't listening. I just wanted to fight. Now here's some crazy attacks. This most important one's being his ability to turn into a cloud and damage me, but I can't hit him, his ability to blow fire at you, and his ground slam attack. All of these attacks did a mass amount of damage and could very well mean the end of me. It took me quite a few attempts, but after a lot of fighting, I beat him. And just like the previous boss, he turned into ash, but instead of dying, he ran away, only leaving behind some menacing words. Thankfully, however, the old man showed up and explained to me what the king's ability was. It was a move called Cloud Step, and he gave it to me. This move allows you to go invisible, leaving a clone in your place, and quickly strike the enemy, usually stunning them. Now that I had beaten the Black Wind King, there was only one main boss left for this chapter. I fought my way up the mountain, eventually arriving at the shrine. A viewer named Brandon told me that I would need to use some body cooling medicines in this fight to help me get through. So I made some. I then went up the stairs and met the final boss of this chapter, the Black Bear Gwai. I started off solid, doing mass damage to him with my transformation. But he eventually did a move I wasn't ready for, where he turns into a fiery cloud and flies at you, leaving fire in his wake. He killed me, over and over and over again. I felt like I was back at the Wandering White. I was then informed that I had missed the secret boss, and he'd give me something to help me beat the final boss. If you remember those bells I was talking about before, well, apparently there was 3 of them, that if I rung, I'd be transported to a secret boss fight. I went and rang the last bell that I needed, and got teleported to a temple called the Ancient Guanyin Temple. I noticed there was a ton of chests here, and I instantly started to loot. Once I was done, I headed to the boss room, and to my horror, it was a gold Wandering White, known as the Elder Jinshi. Now this boss fight was very unique. There were a ton of zombie-like creatures around, that when I hit them, they'd give me health. I made sure to use this a ton, but they also give the boss health back if he killed them. So I had to be careful and handle this boss quickly, which is exactly what I did. A few mobilizations and cloud steps, and one transformation later, the Elder Jinshi was defeated. My reward, a book known as the Fireproof Mantle. This item would significantly increase burn resistance and nullify scorch damage from surfaces like lava. It was exactly what I needed. I went straight back to the final boss and went through it, attacking him with everything I had. And when he would turn into his fire cloud form, I'd use my Fireproof Mantle and decrease the amount of burn damage I would take. Things were going great. It took me a few tries, but eventually I did it. I beat the Black Bear Gwai. Here I received my first relic, Wukong's bird form. At the end of every chapter, there is a little artwork story. They are amazing to watch, and if you plan on playing this game, I highly recommend watching them. But with the bear defeated, the animation watched, the first chapter, Black Cloud, Red Fire, was done. I begin chapter 2, Yellow Sand, Desolate Dusk. I spawn in, located in a bit of a canyon. I look around a little and try to figure out my surroundings. I was warned that this chapter wasn't going to be a fun one. I took this warning with a grain of salt and continued on. I instantly realized that some of the most annoying new enemies of this chapter would be the archers. Trying to time my dodges to their shots was quite difficult. I ultimately killed off some enemies, gathered some resources, and continued until I ran into the giant frog. At this point, I wasn't sure if it was a boss or just a difficult enemy, but when its health bar showed up, I knew I had to be ready for a fight. Or at least I thought I did. I went in swinging using my light attack combos, my heavy attacks, and even some of my abilities, and the frog fell easily. At this point in time, I didn't know what my chat was on about. This chapter was going to be a walk in the park. Nothing could be worse than a nightmare-fueled Wandering White from chapter 1, right? I continued on my path, looting and scavenging. As I was going until I ran into this fox. He wanted me to take out a frog. Me being slow at the time, I didn't realize that I had already taken out the frog he was asking about. I ultimately ran away from him, but don't worry, I returned back to him later on. I eventually made it to what seemed to be a deserted town. Well, deserted by everyone except a fuck ton of enemies that all wanted to kill me. I fought back, and eventually after I had thought I had cleared out all of the enemies, I noticed this creature in a giant open space. This monster ended up being an earth wolf. It turned out to be another side boss. Well, I'm not one to back down from a fight, so I instantly decided to fight the earth wolf. I went in using my light attack combos, and even used my red ties transformation I obtained in chapter 1. But in the end, it was all in vain, and I died. I quickly realized I wasn't ready to face this boss, and I decided to keep moving forward. I opened up a door and saw 2 mole rat looking creatures. Talking, from what I could hear, they were just complaining about their lives. It's okay, I was about to put them out of their misery. Eventually, the smaller one smelled me, and I found out the smaller one was the king of the flowing sands, and the big one was the second prince of the flowing sands. We began to fight them. I decided that it'd be easier to try and defeat the second prince because he was on the ground more, but I definitely did struggle a little because every now and again, the king would come down and throw rocks at me. That would stun me. But in the end, that wasn't going to stop me, and I finished off the second son with a nice big whack to the head. For some reason, after seeing his son get killed, the king didn't want to stick around and he ran away. But that's okay, because I would definitely be dealing with him later. The headless guitar playing monk from the beginning cutscene appeared and started to sing, but I really couldn't have cared less, so I just ran off and left him behind. I now decided that it was a great time to return to the Earth Wolf and get my revenge. I instantly went into my transformation and started attacking. I was expecting to maybe die a few more times as I figured out his attacks, but thankfully that didn't happen. I instantly beat him, first try this time. I finished him off with a light attack and ultimately, like the rest of them, the Earth Wolf fell. In the end. I continued on my way through these barren wastelands, fighting some new enemies. One that was literally a rockman with chicken legs that wanted to sit on my face, and one was a porcupine skeleton with a shield. Neither posed much of a threat to me, so I defeated them both and continued on. Eventually arriving at Fright Cliff. Here is where I would find my first of 6 Buddha heads. You must go over and interact with these heads to later on challenge Secret Boss. After getting the Buddha's eyeballs, I ran over to the shrine I could see nearby and offered my incense. I kept running and facing these rock creatures and found my second Buddha head. After grabbing its eyeball, I ran into this giant glowing rock. I didn't know what it was, so I went over to it and hit it. Turns out it was a boss, known as the Mother of Stones. I kept hitting it thinking this fight would be so easy because there was no enemies around and it wasn't fighting back. Too bad for me, I'd be terribly wrong. Before I could react, a flying fat rock launched himself at me, hitting me. I wasn't expecting it. Turns out the way this fight works is that after doing some damage to the Mother of Stones, she would send out these big rock minions to fight me. Thankfully, with my heavy attack, they proved to be ineffective against me. Kept beating on the boss, taking down her health hit by hit, until there was nothing left, and the boss fell. I didn't really get anything worthwhile from the boss, but it was another fight down. So what the hell? There also just happened to be another Buddha head right next to the fight. So I went over and interacted with it. That's 3 down and only 3 more to go. After that, I remembered that fox that I talked to earlier and wondered if I had done what he'd asked. Turns out I had, and he ended up running away and turning into a cloud in search of a furnace from what I heard. I then found my 4th Buddha head and interacted with it, and then found my 5th one, just a little bit later on. 1 more to go. I continued to loot chests and make my way through the map until I finally found my final Buddha head. This allows me to fight the 2nd Stone Vanguard. After all the running, I had finally arrived at another boss fight. This one was the 1st Stone Vanguard. I started off really strong, getting down to half health. But like with all fights, I slipped up and wasn't able to dodge one of his attacks, and I died. Thankfully though, it didn't take too long until I had finally beat him. I made sure to use my transformation at the start, allowing it time to come back and use my spells in a strategic way. I finally started to pick up timing around dodging. This allowed me to finish the fight off with almost half of my gold left. I eventually made it to the sand slide that I slid down, running into the headless monk again. He gave me a gift, another one of Wukong's abilities. This one is called a Pluck of Many. This one ability is one of the strongest abilities in the game, allowing me to summon in some clones of myself to fight alongside me. After receiving a Pluck of Many, I ran into the Gore-Eye Taoist. He wasn't very hard and I disposed of him quickly, grabbing his soul and grabbing the Luja fragrant vines. This chapter included a lot of running around. It easily felt like one of the biggest maps. Thankfully though, I was about to deal with that rat that I let get away earlier. At least, I thought I was going to. Turns out, he had another son, and this one didn't like him very much, and he ended up eating him. RIP, you little rock-throwing bitch. So now, my opponent would be the first prince of the Flowing Sands. I was warned by my chat that I may struggle with this fight, but I was determined to prove them wrong. So I went in prepared. With my newfound ability and my timing with my dodges, he didn't stand a chance. Then proceeded to continue through the caves, squeezing through a small crack and running straight into a chief. He wasn't difficult either, and I disposed of him quickly. The cave ended up leading me to what would be the second most rage-inducing part of this chapter, the Crouching Tiger Temple. Here is where I would face my most challenging opponent yet, the Tiger Vanguard. Not only was he quick on his paws, but he carried around a giant fucking sword. Like, look at that thing, it's huge. His most common attacks were punching me in the face with his fists and then whipping out his sword to stab me a little. But that wasn't the most deadly attack. No, the attack that gave me real trouble was where he would heavy attack with his sword. The final ability he had was the move Rock Solid. That's possessed by Wukong. This allowed him to turn into stone, or in his case gold, and if I hit him whilst he was in that state, I would get stunned. I easily spent over an hour challenging this boss alone. I wasn't giving up, so over and over again I would run into his lair and get my ass handed to me. I tried seeing if maybe I had missed a fight that could help me a bit more strengthen, but sadly I hadn't. Eventually I finally got the luck I needed. With some solid hits and 1 HP in a dream, I finally was able to beat him. By this point I wasn't even happy I beat him. I was just happy the pain was over for now. From the defeat of the Tiger Vanguard, I received the ability Rock Solid. You will never see me use this ability by choice, so for now, it was irrelevant. At this point, you're meant to add a piece to this statue up the stairs, and continue to the final boss. I wasn't aware of this, so I ran right past and continued on my way. After the massive ass whooping I had received from the Tiger Vanguard, I proceeded to get my ass kicked by regular enemies, and 3 rat chiefs. Thankfully, I made it past all and ended up getting to what I believe is one of the most impressive environment set side fights. I was now face to face with the Tiger's Acolyte. To be quite honest with you, even though the mood was set really well, the boss was easy. I summoned in my clones and decided to attack him. He got pushed into a corner, and to say he got bullied is an understatement. This man literally got absolutely destroyed in the corner. He never stood a chance. After beating the Tiger's Acolyte, I was informed by my chat I had missed the exit to the final boss. So I head back to where I'd beaten the Tiger Vanguard and placed the fragment in the statue. I then got an amazing cinematic of a giant tiger head coming out of the pool of blood and opening up. I followed the path and defeated some enemies along the way, eventually making it to a shrine. I did my offering and noticed the fox from earlier. Turns out he allows you to make these medicines known as celestial medicines, which would permanently upgrade your stats. Once I was done with the fox, I pushed on and arrived at the final boss. I thought I was ready for this, but I was wrong. I entered the fight with the Yellow Wind Sage. I started off with my usual plan of immobilizing the boss and dealing as much damage as I could. I was mainly going to spend the first fight trying to learn his attack patterns, figuring out their timing on my first attempt. I managed to get him down to half HP. I thought I was doing great, until ultimately he stabbed me and crashed my game. That's right, he crashed my game. Turns out Black Myth Wukong is known for crashing. From this point on, I had quite a few experiences with it. But no matter, I thought. I loaded back in and well, I died. Over and over and over again. At this point, it was getting late. I was getting annoyed and I decided to call it for the night and try again the next day. I returned the next day and was made aware that I had not gotten the best item to counter the boss, the Wind Tamer's Bell. This bell would allow me to nullify the boss's second phase. I'm going to explain these next parts very quick. I went over to this drunk warthog and talked with him, eventually giving him some items to sober up. I then met him again, back at the Crouching Tiger Temple, and then returned back to where I first talked to the warthog and fought his brother. Once defeated, I followed him into the old building behind him. He then proceeded to tell me a story about the land and the giant creature that lived underneath the land. Once out of the cutscene, I then needed to fight the Tiger Vanguard again. He wasn't that difficult this time, thankfully. Once defeated, I then needed to help the boss that had been destroying me the night before, the Yellow Wind Sage. Turns out there was a Buddha head on the boss that prevented him from attacking it too. To summon the boss, he would need to hit the drums whilst I went down and fought it. The boss was known as the Fuban. To deal damage to this boss, you need to hit its feet. Once enough damage was dealt, I hopped on his back and activated the Buddha head. This allowed the Yellow Sage and I to tag team this bitch, in the end defeating him. I finally received my Wind Tamer's Bell, which would help me beat the Yellow Wind Sage. Now that I had the bell, I returned to the Yellow Wind Sage and challenged him. I didn't beat him first try, but eventually I finally got the run I was hoping for, with some strong attacks and strategic moves getting me up to the second phase of the boss fight, where I would then ring my bell, nullifying his tornado attack. I finally stood a chance, and in the end, he fell, just like the others before him. Turns out, the head he was carrying around was the headless monk's head, who just happened to be the sage's previous teacher. And for beating the sage, he gave me my second relic. The animation played, and that was the end of chapter 2, Yellow Sand, Desolate Dusk. Up until this time, there was a set of bosses I wasn't able to verse because I had not acquired the part from the second chapter. I went over to this wall where I defeated the first son and hit it with my Wandering Wight. This opened it up where I went inside and opened a chest, acquiring the long scales. This then allowed me to return to chapter 1 and challenge the secret boss behind the waterfall, known as Redlong. To complete this fight, all you need to do was hit the boss enough until he was stunned, and then whilst he lied flat on the ground, you would hit his back, eventually making one of the cores on his back explode, dealing mass damage. After doing this a few times, Redlong was defeated. Next, I returned back to chapter 2, where I went behind the sand waterfall. Here hid Black Long. This boss gave me some trouble, with one of his attacks where he would slam his maces together, causing electric current waves to surge through the ground, dealing damage. Eventually, I was told that just dodging sideways would fix my issue. With this attack, it did, and Blacklong then stood no chance at all. In the end, he was defeated, and now chapter 1 and 2 were for the most part fully completed. Chapter 3 starts in the Cave of Immortals. After running for a while, I eventually made it to Snow Hill Path. Here, I would find my first shrine and make my offering. I would also run into my first boss of the third chapter. Sadly, he is a bit of a coward, so I need to hunt him down. On the Stone Mountain, turns out the stone statues I had been running by, not all of them were stone. Some of them were actually enemies in disguise. Once a special feature with these enemies is when they die, they'll spin their weapon around a few times trying to hit you. Just thought it was a cool little feature that deserved to be mentioned. Once finally making it up the hill, I was finally able to fight the Macau Chief. With a few solid hits and the use of my transformation spell to do mass damage, the boss fled yet again. But this wouldn't be the last time we would see him. I later entered a temple where I killed a few enemies and ran into a chief I'd like to defeat. Too bad for me, even with my amazing skill, there was a bunch of enemies around and his numbers were just too overwhelming, causing me to die. On my second attempt to beat him, I first defeated all the foes surrounding the boss and then faced him. I still almost died, but thankfully I ended up being able to defeat him after beating the chief. I crossed over the bridge and ran into this really ugly looking creature that spoke in riddles and referred to me as the Destined One, and then proceeded to turn me into a bat. Sadly, I couldn't control the movement when I was in the state, but it was definitely a cinematic masterpiece. Traversing through the caves and the land as a bat, I eventually transformed back into my monkey form and noticed a giant frozen lake in front of me. So being the curious monkey I am, I ran straight over to it. Here is where I would fight a boss I have been dreading, Kang Jinlong, the dragon boss. The reason I have been dreading this boss is because the only way to deal damage to him is by either getting little hits in when I had the opportunity to, or by stunning him and dealing damage whilst he was on the ground. Neither of these methods were easy. With his fast-paced movements and his affinity towards lightning attacks, I was out of my element. But this wouldn't stop me. I knocked his health down bit by bit, and after a few tries, I was finally able to defeat Kang Jinlong. After defeating Kang Jinlong, I was ambushed by the Macau Chief and knocked out. I'd then wake up in an unknown place known as the Pagoda Realm. Here, I would need to work my way up 3 levels and get to the top, but each level was covered with enemies. With only 1 or 2 shrines located further up the levels, I wasn't excited for this. Through the levels, there were gates sealed by purple rings. I'd need to defeat the secret boss to be able to access these rooms. So I began pushing up the floors, fighting enemies along my way until I finally made it to my first shrine. Behind me at the shrine was the secret boss. I proceeded to jump down into his arena and began to fight him. His name was Captain Lotus Vision. I thought I started off quite well, dealing damage with my heavy attack and learning his moves, but between sniper laser blasts that came out of the summoned portals and the disco floor of lasers, I eventually was just surrounded and I died. This boss took me a few attempts to learn its moves and ways to counter each move. Most of it was just getting better at timing my dodges and standing in strategic locations in the boss arena to deal the most damage to the boss when it was possible. But after a few tries, I was finally able to whittle away the boss's health until nothing was left. I continued making my way up the levels, killing more weak enemies and eventually made it out. I hit the shrine at the top and entered the giant swinging thing in the middle of the map. Here I would encounter my next boss. Captain Wise Voice. To be quite honest, I was very confused about how to do this fight for a while. I did fuck all damage and I thought I was going to need to slowly take down his health until I noticed his foot. I hit his foot until I stunned him and he fell over, and then I started hitting his head and the real damage started to come in. After doing this a few more times, he was left with the tiniest sliver of health. I turned in my transformation and finished him off, beating Captain Wise Voice on my first try. After beating him, I proceeded to suck up his soul into my gourd and went down to the prince that was located on the first level of the pagoda realm. Here I would talk to him. This would be for a quest that I never ended up doing, at least not for ages. Once I finished talking with him, I found this secret room, which once chapter 5 were completed, I'd be able to fight a secret boss for the best ending of the game. So if you want to see me fight this boss, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll make sure to release part 2 of this video with the last 3 chapters. I continued on my way, defeating more enemies and eventually making it to a temple where an old man was being harassed by the Macau chief. This monkey is proven to be a giant issue. I went over and proceeded to fight him, dealing decent damage, but then one of the most annoying things happened. My game crashed. Again. And I was forced to restart the fight. After re-challenging the chief and dealing enough damage to defeat him, he yet again ran away. I proceeded to talk to the old man and suck up his Ring of Fire into my hand, granting me the ability Ring of Fire. This is another ability that you would never see me use, and it's probably best to just be forgotten about. After a lot more running and working my way up the snowy mountains, I ran into a woman talking to a giant pair of what looked like symbols. Turns out this woman wasn't friendly, and she had an affinity for lightning. The boss known as Kangjin Star was a 2-stage boss fight. Her first stage, having her as a brunette doing simple to dodge moves, the second phase, not as easy. She'd turn her hair white from the lightning and proceed to become super aggressive, dealing mass damage and destroying my health faster than I could register it. After getting my ass kicked time and time again, I finally had an amazing run. With quite a lot of my health left, I was able to defeat Kangjin Star. After defeating her, I was introduced to my companion for the rest of this adventure, a warthog named Daajjeey. He's easily one of the best characters in this game, and if you say otherwise, you're insane. Sadly, I wasn't done with difficult boss fights. My next fight would be with the secret dragon, Cyan Long, another boss that controlled lightning. You'd think by now I'd carry pills around that would help mitigate lightning damage, but no, fuck that. After fighting the boss a few times, getting all of my health wiped by his lightning strikes, and deciding to upgrade my gourd, I was finally able to defeat him with half of my gourd left. Thankfully, this boss didn't take as long. He was just really annoying to face. Now that I had defeated Cyan Long, I chased after Daajjeey. The giant turtle we were on delivered me to an island to check up on his snake friend from many years ago, but all I found was a giant snake carcass and my next challenger, the Apramana bat. Even though it was another flying boss, thankfully it spent a lot of time on the ground, making it an easy target to attack and ultimately defeat. The Apramana bat flew away, and I went up and interacted with the snake skeleton, causing the giant turtle to cry, letting out a singular tear. Daajjeey told me to go over and collect the tear, so that is exactly what I did. After collecting the tear, I noticed another dragon. How many of these fuckers are there? Seriously. I went over to him, and all he wanted to do was fight. To be honest, for my first attempt at this fight, I almost beat him, until he eventually did a combo that I dodged terribly, and he was able to finish me off before I could heal. I challenged him a second time and defeated him swiftly. He finally shut up. I was able to talk to him. Apparently all he wanted to do was be a farmer. Weird. I continued my way around the map, eventually killing off some low tier Apramana bats that were harassing a treasure hunter. Because I saved him, he said he'd split any treasure he found with me. He also asked if he could count on me to save him again. After a lot more running, I finally got into this opening with just a singular building and a small Buddha kid at it. He spoke of a giant Buddha that we couldn't see. So I went around and acknowledged the 4 Buddha statues around the place. And then returned back to him, and there was still nothing there. The Buddha went up the mountain, and I was told by Daajjeey to meet him up there. After getting to the top of the mountain, I would then find my next boss, Non-White. I'm not going to comment on that name. This would be my first experience with a boss that had 2 bars, one being a shield and the other being its health bar. This boss was agile and wouldn't give me much time to breathe, and he killed me on my first attempt. My next attempt, I used my transformation to do most of the damage, and I got him down to half health, where he then proceeded to run. What is up with all of these bosses and running? I hunted him down, killing anyone in my path. until I found where his last stand would be. It was a valiant battle, and I died. Yep, I died. But I'm no quitter. I ran straight back up and challenged him again, this time dodging his attacks and landing a few solid blows myself. This boss could inflict poison damage, so I did need to be wary of that, but in the end I pounded him into the ground and took his soul. I later on ran into an almost dead person. After talking to them for a bit, a fox jumped off their shoulders and ran at me, and I suddenly was craving rabbit. I don't know why. I later ran into my next challenger, Captain Cowper Wave. This boss would manipulate blood to attack me, but this boss truly seemed to be more intimidating than dangerous, and I ended up beating Captain Cowper Wave first try. I proceeded into the new Thunderclap Temple behind Captain Cowper Wave's body. This was the final stretch. I was almost done chapter 3. I worked my way through the temple, dealing with any chiefs or enemies I encountered, and taking their souls for my collection. I eventually ran into a little side boss just before the final fight, called Non-Pure. The only thing non-pure going on here was how I proceeded to ruthlessly beat him to a pulp, until he was nothing more than a floating spirit. That was another one added to my collection. I meditated on the spot behind him to build up enough courage to run past the two giants guarding the stairs to the final fight. I eventually ran for it, only getting stomped on once thankfully. I made it up the stairs. I finally had made it to the giant red door where the final boss hid. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, and that this boss would be powerful, but the boss kind of lost me in the intimidation factor. It was the small Buddha kid from earlier, but he was wearing yellow now. He eventually turned into yellow brown, a giant fat Buddha. His only weakness being a McDonald's family box. I began my fight with him, and because of his size, he was very slow and it was easy to get through his first phase. He proceeded to launch me in the air and suck me into his sack. Yes, you heard that correct. His sack. I'll never be able to recover from knowing I was sucked into a man's sack. Thankfully, however, I wasn't the only one in his sack. Daajjeey was already here, and so was the Macau monkey from earlier? I started to feel dirty, knowing that this man would just suck up anyone and everyone. Turns out, I was going to need to defeat the Macau monkey. Finally. It took a few attempts, but eventually I got used to all the red clouds blocking my vision, and just learning the timing to dodge his attacks, and he was defeated. This next part is easily one of the best parts of this game. I got to play as the Macau monkey and got let loose to slaughter all of the stone figurines on the wall. I rampaged through them, chopping everyone up. That was in my path. I eventually got to the end of the stage, and there I would need to challenge Yellowbrow one last time. It proved not to be as easy as the first fight with him. This part of the fight contained not one, not two, but 3 phases, and he also was able to use the same rock ability as the Tiger Vanguard from chapter 2. After quite a few attempts, I learned there was 2 ways to beat his rock solid state. Either hit him with a 4-point charge attack, or wait for him to release the spell. I chose the heavy attacks. For transitions between phases, he'd hit you and the damage would transfer to you in your next stage. This meant I had to be very careful with my heals, or I would run out too quickly. Thankfully, I finally beat all stages. I was on the moon until the worst thing happened. My game crashed again during the cutscene, and I was forced to fight the boss again. So I did exactly that, fighting through all 3 of his phases, hitting him with heavy attacks, and not beating Yellowbrow, not just once, but twice. This time, I skipped the cutscene and the cinematic played. I received my rewards for beating chapter 3, and that was chapter 3 completed. If you made it all the way to the end of this video, consider watching the video up on your screen right now. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe. I just wanted to quickly thank everyone who watched me live again. I really appreciate all the support on the live streams. Now with all of that being said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.